Have you ever met a woman who seems to have it all together, yet she's constantly exhausted? Not from her schedule, from her own mind. She's the one replaying a 10-second interaction from lunch until 200 a.m., mapping out every possible way she could have been misunderstood, every word that landed wrong, every pause that felt too long. Nothing went wrong. The day was fine. But her brain won't stop asking what if. And here's what's interesting about that. Psychology doesn't call this anxiety. It doesn't call it weakness or instability. It has a much more specific name, and understanding it changes everything about how you see these women, and maybe how you see yourself. Today we're looking at why this happens, what's actually driving it at a brain level, and what it quietly says about who these women are. But to get there, we have to start by naming what's actually going on. There's a paradox sitting at the center of this. The exact cognitive habit that makes a woman thoughtful, socially aware, and deeply empathetic is the same habit that's quietly draining her. Not separately. The same one. The thing that makes her good at reading a room is the thing keeping her up at night. Psychologists call it maladaptive rumination. It's when the mind circles back to the same thought loops again and again, especially around uncertainty, past conversations, or social situations. Something someone said 3 days ago, a text that got a slower reply than usual, a meeting where she couldn't tell if she'd said too much. The brain pulls at these threads on repeat, not because something is wrong with her, but because her mind is genuinely wired to search for meaning. Research consistently shows that women who ruminate aren't doing it from a place of weakness. Their brains are exceptionally good at pattern recognition, always scanning, always processing, always looking for signals in the noise. That's not a malfunction. That's a very sophisticated system running at full capacity with no off switch. And that last part matters. The problem isn't the intelligence. It's that the system never gets a signal to stop. What makes this specifically a women's experience is that rumination rates in women run nearly double those in men, and researchers tie this directly to higher social sensitivity and stronger emotional processing networks. Women are, neurologically, more attuned to social dynamics. They track more. They feel more. They process more of it afterward. That's not a flaw in the design. But it does mean the mental load runs heavier and stays on longer. So, where does this pattern actually start? Because it almost never begins in adulthood. The loops you're running now were probably installed a long time ago, and to understand that, you have to go back. Think about a girl growing up in a house where the emotional temperature changed without warning. Maybe one parent's mood could shift the entire dynamic of the evening, and nobody ever knew which version of them was coming home. Maybe small mistakes had consequences that felt wildly out of proportion. Maybe love felt conditional on behavior that was never clearly defined. In that environment, the young brain makes a very rational decision. If I can think ahead far enough, if I can map every possible outcome, maybe I can stay safe, predict to protect. It's not overthinking in that context. It's survival. A smart nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. The problem is that the nervous system doesn't automatically retire that strategy when the environment changes. The girl grows up, leaves the house, builds a stable life, and the brain keeps running the same software. Still scanning, still anticipating, still trying to think far enough ahead to avoid the thing that might go wrong. This is where the neurology becomes important. In women who overthink chronically, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain handling planning, analysis, and self-reflection, stays highly active even during rest. Most people's brains have a kind of natural idle mode. In overthinkers, that mode is essentially broken. The brain doesn't downshift. It keeps processing. At the same time, something called the default mode network stays running in the background. This is the brain's internal system for self-referential thought, the part generating the ongoing mental monologue. In overthinkers, it doesn't quiet down between tasks. It keeps drafting responses to conversations that haven't happened. It keeps rehearsing scenarios for situations that may never arrive. And then dopamine gets involved, which is where it gets genuinely tricky. The brain releases small amounts of dopamine during problem solving, including imagined problem solving. So when a woman runs through a difficult scenario in her head, analyzing the angles, playing out the outcomes, her brain is receiving a mild chemical reward just for the activity itself, not for arriving at an answer, just for thinking. That's why just stop thinking about it has never worked for anyone. The brain has a chemical incentive to keep going. The worrying literally feels like progress, like she's doing something useful, even when she's just looping. And that feeling of progress leads directly to what psychologists identify as the illusion of mental progress, which is where things get even more complicated. Not all overthinking works the same way, and psychologists actually draw a clear line between two distinct types. Understanding which one is running at any given moment is the difference between processing and spiraling. The first is reflective rumination. This is when a woman turns inward to understand what she's feeling, to make sense of an experience, to figure out what she actually wants. When it's balanced, this kind of thinking is a genuine asset. It's connected to higher emotional intelligence, deeper self-awareness, and the ability to grow through difficult situations rather than just survive them. The second is brooding rumination, passive, circular, and distressing. This is dwelling on a problem without moving toward any resolution, replaying the same moment over and over without getting any closer to clarity. This is where the real costs accumulate. Sleep that won't come because the brain won't stop. Decisions that feel impossible because every option has already been analyzed into paralysis. Social anxiety that builds quietly from over-analyzing every interaction until being around people feels like a performance review. Here's what makes this genuinely difficult. Most women move between both types, sometimes within the same hour, and because the brain stays engaged throughout, it's hard to feel the shift happening. Reflection and brooding can feel identical from the inside. The mind is active. The thoughts feel purposeful, and there's this persistent sense that you're almost at the answer. That's the illusion of mental progress in action. The thinking feels like it's building towards something, but it's actually just circling. What the research adds to this, and this is the part that often surprises people, is that women who ruminate score significantly higher on measures of cognitive empathy. Not emotional contagion, where you feel what someone else is feeling, but cognitive empathy, the ability to accurately anticipate how another person thinks, what they need, how a situation is landing for them before they say a word. The same processing system that generates the exhausting loops is what makes these women perceptive in a way that most people simply aren't. They walk into a room and read its emotional temperature without trying. They notice the shift in someone's tone before that person even realizes it themselves. So the engine is the same. The capacity that makes overthinking so draining is what makes these women so attuned. Perception without resolution, though, is its own weight. Noticing everything and being unable to stop noticing is not the same as understanding everything. And thinking harder has never been the answer to that gap. Because some things can't be solved by thinking. Some things have to be felt, decided, or simply released. This is where a framework from acceptance and commitment therapy becomes useful, a concept called cognitive diffusion. It's not about stopping thoughts. It's about changing your relationship to them. Instead of this situation is dangerous and I need to figure it out, the shift is toward my brain is generating a concern right now. One version pulls you into the thought and makes it your reality. The other gives you a sliver of distance, enough to see the loop for what it is, without being inside it. It's a small move, but that distance changes what's possible. What all of this points to is something that goes beyond any single coping technique. Overthinking in women isn't a character flaw. It isn't a sign of instability or being too sensitive or too much. It's a highly active mind that learned to stay alert in an environment that once made alertness necessary. The thinking kept her safe when safety wasn't guaranteed. The challenge now isn't to silence that mind. It's to slowly teach it that the uncertainty it's still preparing for has already passed, that it's safe enough, finally, to rest. We all carry patterns built from experiences we didn't choose. Understanding where yours came from doesn't erase them, but it does loosen their grip. And sometimes that's exactly where change begins. If you found this interesting, the next video goes even deeper into how the mind really works. So if you want to understand people on a completely different level, you should watch that one next.